Number one Oregon's next test is Maryland. Can the Terps hang around? We're going to find out today.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to a crossover edition of Locked On Ducks and Locked On Terps. I'm Spencer McLaughlin of Locked On Ducks. That's Tre Moore of Locked On Terps. Thank you for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with either Oregon or Maryland, depending on which fan base you're supporting heading into this matchup. But for everyone, the episode's brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, Tre, we're going to ask each other the biggest questions, the matchups and players that'll define this game coming up on today's show. But I want to start a little bit big picture here. Oregon is a big old 24.5, 25-ish point favorite at Autzen Stadium. Vegas has got plenty of confidence in the Ducks. So too do I. But crazier things have happened. Northern Illinois beat Notre Dame on their home field earlier this season. If something like that were to occur, or if Oregon fans were to be sweating more than they would like to, how do you think that plays out for Maryland?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be tough. It's something that nobody really expects Maryland to do, but like they say, crazier things have happened, and there's a couple different ways it can play out. For the Terps, I always like to think the turnovers are the number one thing that can kind of, in a matchup like this, make something interesting, make a game where Maryland's just outmatched basically everywhere you look. I think the turnovers are the number one thing you look at. But for a Maryland team that's really struggling to get any Big Ten wins, and the only one we currently have is the USC win, and that continues to kind of go down every single week because it feels like they keep losing. But I think keeping
it doesn't feel like they keep losing. They do indeed keep losing.
They do indeed keep losing. So that win seems to lose value a lot. But I think for the Terps, finding a way to keep it close, to me, it's about the turnover battle and finding a way to probably get 2, 3, 4 turnovers and not turning over the ball at all. I think that's probably their best bet to keeping it close on the road against Oregon.
Stylistically, you have two teams that are really capable when you talk about throwing the football. Dillon Gabriel is a top 3 Heisman betting favorite right now. We'll see if he ends up getting an invite to New York City at the end of this year. If Oregon keeps winning, his case is going to be pretty strong. I think there's kind of not a big test per se, but a next test for Dillon Gabriel this week without Tez Johnson in the lineup for the first time this year since he took over as Oregon's quarterback this season. I'm interested to see how that plays out, but I think there's a world where neither one of these teams is running the ball a ton. I think there's a world where Oregon tries to do what it's been doing in the last few weeks, which is kind of a 60-40 pass-run balance. But if Maryland isn't able to slow down Oregon's rushing attack, I think Will Stein will say, we'll just hand the ball to Jordan James 20 times and Noah Whittington 12 times and go for 250 yards and however many touchdowns. But I think the number one thing that people should expect to see in this game, Tre, is definitely the modern approach to football, and that's put it in the air, throw the ball, and be able to push it down the field.
Right, yeah. I totally agree. I think that the best way for Maryland to stay in the game is to throw the ball. With Billy Edwards. I think our running game has been bad all year. I don't think it's necessarily our running backs are bad. It's just our offensive line has been really poor. And I always like to believe if you don't have a good offensive line that can run block, then no matter how much talent you got in the backfield, it's usually not going to be that good. And I think that's been a problem of Maryland. And our passing game has been there sometimes, and it's been good at times. But it's also because we just throw the ball a ton. So the numbers are always a little bit misstrued in terms of Billy Edwards as a passer and what he does in the Big Ten. But I do think that he's going to have to create some big plays throwing the football. I don't think we're going to rely on the run game. I don't think we're going to be able to run the ball. And if we're being honest, we're probably going to go down early on, which is going to make us throw the football. So I do think for the Terps to stay in the game at all in terms of styles, I think it's going to have to be throwing the football for a lot of yardage to some of the talent. What I always say is the strength of our team is the receiver room. So in terms of those guys on the outside, I think That's going to have to be a big part of the game plan, because every single game I feel like I come on to Locked on Terps and say Maryland's got to run the ball better, but it just never happens. And I don't think it'll happen against Oregon on the road.
And the interesting thing about passing against Oregon, it's been a big struggle this year. 8 of the 9 quarterbacks to play this Oregon defense have ended under 200 yards passing. The only guy that's been over, as you might expect, is Ohio State's Will Howard, with one of the best receiving corps in all of college football. Last week against Michigan, though, the numbers are not going to blow anybody away. Davis Warren went for, I think it was in the 132, 140-ish yard range, but he made a couple of big-time throws in crucial spots, a couple of 3rd and goal situations that resulted in touchdowns, a 3rd and 12 that helped keep the drive alive. And those weren't plays that I expected Michigan to be able to make. I don't know that shows some underlying cracks in the Oregon pass defense. I think the opposite. They have the ability to kind of shore those things up. But at the very least, for Oregon defensively, Tre, they're going up against a passing attack that is just good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, to me, it starts with those 2 guys on the outside for Maryland, Tai Felton and Caden Prather. Ty's been one of the best receivers all year in college football, and he's a really good guy, and I think he's one of the best in the Big Ten, and I think he's overlooked still, even though in terms of production, he's at the top when you go through all the different stats, not only in the Big Ten receiving stats, but just in the entire country. So I do think that if that's a place that Maryland can stay in the game, but I also think if we get into a drop back game, Oregon's going to be able to get to us, and I think it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. We'll see if Maryland's offensive line can hold up somewhat in the passing game. I don't even want to say like completely hold up. I just don't think that's realistic, but hold up somewhat in the passing game against Oregon. But I think one of the biggest things I've talked about all year is Maryland on the other side of the ball. Our secondary has just been really bad. So that's something that's definitely something that I think Oregon, when you look at it, can definitely take advantage of with Gabriel back there at quarterback.
Yeah, and Gabriel's been playing well. And by the way, it was 165 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions for Davis Warren last week. I think there is a world in which Maryland is over the 200-yard passing mark if Oregon's pass defense plays the way it did a week ago. Now, maybe they were overcommitting to the run, and they don't feel like they need to do that against this Maryland team. I think that chess match will be really interesting to see how that all plays out. We still have a lot of show to play out because I'm going to put Tre on the witness stand, metaphorically speaking, of course, and he's got to answer the biggest questions or just talk about how Maryland, if at all, can answer some big questions. And then we'll flip roles in the 3rd segment. So the biggest questions for Maryland, for me, they start with that offensive line. We're going to talk about that coming up next. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. New gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. That's Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC. And as always, this episode brought to you by friends over at FanDuel. They are the official sportsbook of Locked On. Why? Because they're America's #1 sportsbook. So you could say they're the official sportsbook of the United States as well. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need. Everything. Not most of the things, everything you need to place live bets on the NFL. And it's all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can get all the information that you need and get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. If your first $5 bet is Oregon to beat Maryland, boom! Oregon should be able to win the football game and then get you $150 in bonus bets at FanDuel.com. FanDuel.com is where you go to join today. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbooks partner. Almost had it, but I think you get the idea that FanDuel is an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, continuing on with our Locked On crossover. I'm Spencer McLaughlin, Locked On Ducks. Tre Moore, Locked On Terps, Maryland Terrapins. That is the abbreviated version of it. I want to start with the number one question. I had several Oregon fans send me some questions that I want to ask you here, Tre. And for me, and for a couple of Oregon fans as well, it starts with the offensive line. It doesn't look like it has been a strength for Maryland this year. What have you seen from those guys up front?
It's bad. It's been bad all year. It's just that's pretty much what I have to say about it. It's been bad all year. And for me, the thing that is the biggest disappointment is it's not like they do one thing well. It'd be one thing if they're pass protecting well, but they're not run blocking well, or vice versa. They're doing both things at a bad level, which makes it really, really hard to function offensively. And that's why I think we saw Billy Edwards struggle a little bit last week. It's because that offensive line just doesn't allow us to run the ball, doesn't allow us to pass the ball, doesn't give our quarterbacks any time. And that's our biggest weakness on our offense by far. And like I talked about before, I feel like our running backs are good players, good athletes, explosive guys, but they just can't really get going because there's just not holes. And we haven't even played a team like Oregon yet. So I can't imagine what it's going to look like against you guys. My guess is pretty bad.
Yeah, I mean, if I physically were out there in the trenches, I think the Maryland offensive line would be really good. But alas, I will not be, because this Oregon defensive line that got Jordan Birch back last week against Michigan, they are deep, they are talented, they've got high-end guys, they've got plenty of depth, they've got a lot of different packages they can use. I think that's maybe the biggest reason to feel confident about Oregon going into this game. By the way, did you guys over there in Maryland know that Tez Johnson is Bo Nix's brother?
Did not.
Did not. Okay, well, you're going to learn. I guarantee you will learn at some point. For my Maryland fans out there listening or watching, this is an ongoing saga in which every televised broadcast takes the opportunity to remind us of something that we Oregon fans have heard no less than 20 times in the last year or so. But on the note of wide receivers, this is where the Maryland offense has been at its best. You mentioned Tai Felton and the other pass catchers. What makes them so effective for this Terps offense?
Yeah, I think in terms of Tai Felton, he just has the ability to do everything. He's a complete receiver. He can get vertical. He can do some of the quick stuff, the quick slants. He can run routes. He's an explosive guy down the field, and he's been the life of our offense the entire year. And he's been by far our best player. And then I think Caden Prather on the other side brings a little bit of a different element where he's not quite the player, the route runner, the athlete that Tai is, but he's a guy that's like 6'4", and he just goes up and makes contested catches all the time for touchdowns, for big plays when we need it. And that's a really big part of Caden Prather's game. And he makes game-changing types of plays that can really alter how the game goes. I always talk about when he caught a touchdown over Will Johnson against Michigan last year. And his body type is really special. And a guy that also came on the last couple weeks in the receiver room has been Octavian Smith, the junior, who we've kind of been waiting for. Really explosive kid, not the biggest guy, about 5'10", but he may be one of the fastest guys, or for sure is one of the fastest guys on the team, but might be the fastest guy on the team. He's a guy that has also really came on, really had a big game against USC. So definitely watch out for him as well.
It's amazing that we've gotten this far into the show, Tre, and we haven't talked about Maryland's quarterback situation yet. Oregon fans that do box score perusing might have noticed that last week against Minnesota, there were a couple of quarterbacks that came into the game. What's Maryland dealing with at that spot?
Yeah, it sounds like Billy Edwards is still going to start, but I would not be surprised at all if MJ Morris plays a little bit, plays a good amount, because I've been saying we brought in MJ Morris this year, and I believe that we haven't been good enough, and Billy Edwards hasn't been good enough, where it's like we shouldn't play MJ Morris, or MJ Morris shouldn't get an opportunity to play. It's like, why did we bring in MJ Morris if we're not going to give him an opportunity to play? It'd be one thing if we're undefeated, number one, like you guys, but we're not. So I think MJ Morris might get an opportunity to play. And I've said it's only fair if both quarterbacks get to play in this game because they're probably not going to look great. So whoever plays, if only one guy plays, then that's a lot of pressure on them. And I kind of believe both guys should play. But I'm pretty positive that Billy's going to start. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if MJ gets in the game because 2 weeks ago, last week we had our bye, but 2 weeks ago, MJ Morris came into the game in relief for Billy Edwards and looked really good, had 2 touchdowns, got the offense going, while Billy Edwards had by far his worst game. So I do think that Billy Edwards could have a rebound game and put up some stats maybe, but it's going to be tough against Oregon. But I also think that wouldn't be surprised if he struggles a lot, and that's probably my best guess, and we could see both guys for sure.
Talk about the secondary, which will not have to defend Tez Johnson on Saturday, as I talked about, but still has to try and cover Evan Stewart and Trayshawn Holden, and Gary Bryant Jr. might be back, the one-time USC transfer. You've got a couple of tight ends who have been really good, 3 of them who have been involved, and I think Sadiq and Ferguson in particular have been really good at catching the football this year. Dylan Gabriel does a great job just spreading the ball around. I was talking to Jake Budd of the Big Ten Network, who was asking me about Oregon. He said, well, what makes them, so good and hard to defend? And my instinctual reaction was, you never know where the ball's going. You never know. Like, yeah, you could go to Evan Stewart on 3rd down. You go to Tez Johnson. You go to Trayshawn Holden. You go to Terrence Ferguson. You go to Kenyon Sadiq. Like, all of these guys have made spots or made big catches everywhere except the tight ends in the red zone. A tight end doesn't have a touchdown for Oregon this year. I'll talk about that more on tomorrow's show for my Locked On Ducks crowd out there. But why has it been a struggle for this Maryland secondary, and what have the issues been as they get ready to face this Oregon passing attack?
Yeah, I mean, we just don't have experience back there. We don't have a bunch of guys that have played a lot of football, and we're playing some younger guys as well, some freshmen. We just don't have the names and the talent that we've had in the past. Like, we've had guys that have gone the NFL draft like Deontay Banks and Jacorian Bennett, and Tarheeb Still is starting for the Chargers now. We don't have a guy like that. And so at the end of the day, to me, it's just a talent issue. We don't have a ton of talent back there, and we're playing a lot of younger guys as well. And we don't have anyone very experienced that has played established Big Ten ball in terms of the cornerback room. In our safety room, it's a little bit different with Dante back there and Glendon Miller. But in terms of the corner position, that's been my biggest concern really all year, and somewhere that I completely expect Oregon to be able to take advantage of, even without one of their, even without your top target, Tez Johnson. I honestly, it probably doesn't matter. Maryland hasn't been able to cover anybody all year.
Last thing before we flip roles here is the progression of Maryland's games this year. So one of the few, I'll call it a gripe, one of the few gripes that Oregon fans have had this season amidst a point where they're 9-0, ranked number 1 in the country. No one has any arguments about that. Big win against Ohio State. Third quarters have not been very good for the Ducks. The first and second quarters, the second quarter in particular, they've been phenomenal. But you look at games like Purdue and Illinois, the games were over by half. Michigan, made a little bit of a comeback in the second half, but Oregon was up 28-10 at the break. When has Maryland rather been strongest this year, and how have they fared in third quarters this season coming out of the half?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at some games, I look at the USC game. We came out really strong in the second half. In the third quarter, we were down 21 to 7. We're able to come back. We've done a decent job of coming out of halves and playing well, but we've also had games where we've dropped games in the second half. Games that we've done well. I remember Virginia, we were down at the half, but there's been games where we've been up and we felt like we were in control, and then suddenly third quarter comes, second half comes, like Michigan State earlier on in the season, and we drop off. So it's been up and down. I don't know if there's a complete trend to it for Maryland, but if we want any chance of keeping it close against Oregon, we better come out fast in the second half, whatever the score is.
Those are the questions that I have for Tre. What questions does he have for me about Oregon? That is coming up next. Guys, ever feel like you need a little boost in the bedroom? It's time you stop worrying about your performance and get Hims so you can be at your best when you want to be. Hims is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. You can get a personalized ED treatment plan without stepping foot outside your door with Hims. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. Go check them out at hims.com/lockedon.
So I got a couple different things, and one, I got to start a little bit off topic where it doesn't have to do with Maryland, but I know the Maryland fans are wondering, is Dillon Gabriel going to win the Heisman this year?
Man, he's got the opportunity to. It's just a crowded field. And it's not just crowded in the sense that you have other talented players there. It's the way that those players have put themselves in the Heisman position. So Travis Hunter is literally a unicorn. We have not seen a player play as often and be as good on both sides of the ball as Travis Hunter has been so far this season. So that's one guy who's incredibly unique. Ashton Genty is kind of fading in the Heisman odds right now. I don't really understand why. He is at a clip of rushing yards to gain this season, or what he's on pace for, that we haven't seen since Barry Sanders. Like those two guys, really hard to beat. And then you've got Cam Ward. So like if I had a Heisman ballot, as much as I love Dillon Gabriel and the way he's playing, and he can lead Oregon to a national championship game, which is I think all Oregon fans really care about, and having a Heisman Trophy winner would just be an added bonus, I'd probably have him fourth. And I say that because Cam Ward down at Miami with our old friend Mario Cristobal is more important to that Miami team than Dillon Gabriel is to Oregon. That doesn't mean Gabriel isn't essential. I don't think they'd win the national championship without him. But Ward is putting up bonkers numbers. He had 400 yards and 5 touchdowns in their last game. He is leading comebacks of double digits on the regular, and it's all going through him. So he doesn't have a great team around him, and Miami and Oregon have got the same record right now. Oregon's, of course, ranked number 1. Miami has not played a team as good as Ohio State, so that's why Oregon's ranked ahead of them. But I think you'd have to, if you take off your Oregon blinders, you'd say Cam Ward has been more important, which is not to say Dillon Gabriel doesn't matter and anyone could just fit in there. No, that is not what I'm saying at all. Ward has just been that spectacular. So is Gabriel in the mix? Yes. I don't even think he's a lock to be a finalist right now. I think it depends on how Boise State's season winds up going if they win the Mountain West, how Colorado's goes for Travis Hunter. If one of those teams stumble, then as unfair as it is, the Heisman candidacy can falter as well. And that's how I think the door could open for him to get in there, because I think Oregon will be 12-0 by the end of the regular season.
Right. That makes sense. My next thing is about kind of what weapon should I be most concerned about? I know you talked about there's a bunch of different guys that can do a bunch of different things, but should Maryland fans be more concerned about Jordan James in the running game, or should we be more concerned about Holden and Evan Stewart and some of the tight ends in the passing game and Dillon Gabriel chucking those guys the ball?
I think it's the passing game. It's been the more consistent and explosive element of Oregon's offense. They have good balance. Jordan James is good. Noah Whittington has come on as a number 2 back after getting off to a little bit of a slow start this season. They have run the ball well. I would not say they run it as well as they throw it, because they pass it really well, and I don't think they need to. So you'll see a lot of different things from this Will Stein coordinated offense. He's doing a great job, and Dillon Gabriel is really settled in, and if you don't disrupt him, he's going to pick you apart. He is just going to, you have to be able to get pressure on him, because if he gets to sit in the pocket and slice and dice, survey the field, and throw the ball to all these different weapons that he's got, even without Tez Johnson, everyone can be a threat on any given play. I'd definitely be more concerned, especially with Maryland's secondary issues, with the passing attack than the rushing attack. But if you sit too heavy on the pass and you play too deep safety all game, they'll check into run plays aplenty, and Jordan James can run the football and has been always consistently over 100 yards, but never really, except for Michigan State, over 150. He's not having, Ashton Genty level 175, 200-yard games. But certainly he's a guy who you look up and say, yeah, he averaged about 5.5 yards a carry in the game. He went for 120 and 2 touchdowns. Right. So I'd say the passing attack and just the array of weapons that Gabriel has and the confidence he's playing with. But if you don't take away the running game, if you don't limit the running game, then Oregon can gash you there.
Right. Oregon's defense, I want to switch over to that side of the ball. Some of the pass rushers, and I've talked about how poor Maryland's offensive line is. How dominant is Oregon's pass rush exactly? I know you guys got a couple of guys that are really top-end guys.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, this is my pivotal confident, or not pivotal, that's not the right word. It's my primary confidence point in this matchup for Oregon's defense. Maryland's offensive line has been a struggle. Oregon's defensive line has been as advertised. And I advertised it pretty high. If I'd made a billboard for it, I would have had what I said on the show, which is in the summer, best Oregon defensive line in 10 years since they last went to the national championship. And I think this one is better. Derek Harmon looks insane. Derek Harmon is insane. He doesn't look insane. He is insane. The way that he is able to make impact plays consistently from the defensive tackle spot is not something Oregon has had since DeForest Buckner was in Eugene, and he's still playing on Sundays and getting paid very handsomely to do so. And I love Harmon. Birch is back. Mateo Uyunglele has made a sophomore jump. He's a former 5-star recruit. I think he technically lost a star towards the end of the recruiting rankings, but go watch that guy play football and tell me he's not a 5-star caliber player. The depth, the versatility, and just the consistent impact they have allows them to not need to blitz to create pressure. And I think in this game, you'll see a lot of 6 or 7 man coverages for Oregon in key spots because they won't feel like they need to bring extra guys. They'll have their simulated pressures. That's been a staple of this defense the last couple of years. But certainly they're not going to feel the need to bring 6 or 7 in order to pressure whoever's playing quarterback for Maryland. That defensive line can cause havoc on their own.
Right. And my last question is, sticking on the defense side of the ball, I feel like we haven't really talked about the Oregon secondary. Passing game, we're going to throw the ball a lot. It's just what we do. Feels like no matter who the quarterback is, we're going to throw the ball a lot. Can Maryland take advantage of Oregon secondary?
I think this is a much stiffer test for Oregon secondary. They're incredibly capable, though. The passing yardages they have allowed per game this season go like this: 168, 148, 178, 125, 191, 326 against Ohio State, 93, 161, and 165. Now, there were definitely that 165 last week against Michigan is really worth more than that because of how bad that passing offense was. Yeah. Most of that went to Colston Loveland. Yeah. But then you look at the Maryland side of things and you say, yeah, well, you know where the ball's going to go. It's probably going to go to Tai Felton on a big third down. Can you take that away? Now, Loveland's a tight end and didn't have Jabbar Muhammad matched up on him. And I wonder if Muhammad shadows Felton in this game, or if they trust a guy, Nico Reed, who played well against Ohio State, and Brandon Johnson, who's been really good this year for the Ducks defense. If they look at those guys and say, no, we're going to trust all 3 of those corners to match up with Felton no matter where he goes. But I think a big reason that Oregon's pass defense has been so good this year has been the defensive line. I think that's where it starts, but I don't want that to take away from this secondary. Like, have they been unbelievable, out of this world, incredible? I mean, if you're comparing them to Michigan's defense from last year, then no. But if you're comparing them to any other Oregon defense, I think they've been really, really good. Right. I think this secondary has got a couple of NFL caliber guys. Certainly Muhammad will be. And I think that last week there were some cracks in the dam that showed through more than I was expecting. So I'm curious to see how they respond. But so far, Ohio State's wide receivers are the only ones that have been able to really take advantage of them. So I think there could be an opportunity or two, but these guys have been really, really good this year, and they have stayed away from penalties for the most part as well.
Right. Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Well, I think that wraps. Do you want to do predictions here? I got a score in my head that I aired on Locked On College Football, so I'm gonna stick to it. If you don't have a score prediction, You don't have to today necessarily.
I'll give one.
All right.
You can go ahead, you can go first though. I'll
All
throw one
right.
out.
I like Oregon in this spot a lot. I think the defense does have a bounce back from a week ago, and I think they beat Maryland 38-7. I won't be surprised if Oregon's point total is higher given the secondary struggles, but no Tez Johnson, I think, is still an adjustment to keep them under 40. So I'll put them right at 38, and I'll say 38-7. Oregon wins, and I don't think they allow a touchdown, and I think they only allow the one. And I'm also kind of predicting a missed field goal from Maryland in there somewhere because I don't think they'll only have one scoring capable drive, but I think for Oregon, they're going to be able to play really, really well early in this game, get a big lead. That's been their MO. 38-7 is where I'm going.
I had somewhere around 45-10, 42-10. So pretty similar spot. I think I don't have the missed field goal though. Basically
on the road, cross country trip, something crazy is going to happen. I mean, this is a long way to go.
Yeah, that's what I've been saying. There's been some fluke stuff that happened this year in college football, but a missed field goal, I guess, wouldn't be the flukiest thing. But still, yeah, I see like 45-10 about. I think Oregon scores a ton, and I think they score easily, and they're going to score quick with some big hitters. And I think Maryland doesn't score a lot, but I think they have a couple of decent drives. Maybe later on the game, and some garbage time add on a field goal, but that's kind of how I see the game go.
That's Tre Moore, Locked On Terps. I'm Spencer McLaughlin, Locked On Ducks. We appreciate you listening. We'll see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.